Before Squaresoft released Final Fantasy and helped create the JRPG genre, they had created a few decent games including Rad Racer and the ambitious 3D World Runner. They also created probably the worst RPG I've ever played in my entire life in King's Knight. Now, to be fair, it barely has any RPG elements in it, and the game was a pretty ambitious idea in turning a vertical scrolling shooter into an RPG. The problem is that it is such an awful game that I'm not surprised they almost went out of business in the late 80s and early 90s. The development is pretty simple. It was developed and published by Square, released in 1989 to NES, Famicom, which was a Japan-only release, and the MSX, again, Japan-only release. It was also re-released to Nintendo's Virtual Console store on March 24th, 2008. No complicated background behind it or baton passes to other teams. I'm not going to explain who Square is at this point. You probably know who Squaresoft, or Square-Enix is already. I will mention this about the MSX version. Upon research, the MSX version of King's Knight was different from the Famicom or NES version in a variety of ways. The opening was modified so that prior to the intro screen, players could specify what type of controller they would like to use. The in-game dynamics were very similar, although some differences exist. In the MSX version, the flanks of the screen were closed off while the stage maps were moved slightly, and so some of the items appeared to be out of their original locations. Finally, the MSX version may seem easier because the characters can take more hits before dying. Square also took advantage of technological capabilities available on the MSX. As an upgrade, the MSX port featured more sound channels than the Famicom, and as such, many music tracks and sound effects were altered or improved. The MSX version also has a wider range of colors, updated graphics, new monster and boss designs, and a new sidebar which displayed the player's life meter, allocated power-ups, and allocated elements. Unfortunately though, the MSX could not smoothly render vertical scrolling, so movement of the graphics is very choppy in comparison. So to make a long story short, the MSX got the better version of the game. The story is a typical NES era storyline to the point that even Wikipedia says it's typical. Princess Claire has been kidnapped in the kingdom of Izender, and you must train to defeat the evil dragon and rescue her. To use at your disposal are the knight Rajak, the wizard Kaliva, the monster Barusa, and the kid thief Toby. None of this is explained during the game, so if you don't have the manual, you're screwed. The graphics are pretty generic. It looks okay for a 1989 game, but it's a lot to be desired. Levels look flat, use very few colors, and get worse after the first level. From there, the color selection is absolutely awful. Shots blend into the background, make it harder for you to know what you're aiming at. It also strains your eyes when the background is the same brightness of a certain color as your character or as enemy shots. The only real salvageable part of the graphics is the destructible elements. So if the land is destroyable to reveal secrets, but most of the time it reveals more enemies to shoot at. You can also jump on top of it, but it really adds nothing to the game. It's not much, but it adds a minor layer of depth to the levels. The audio is forgettable at best and headache-inducing at worst. If I told you that Nobuo Uematsu worked on the soundtrack, you'd probably say I'm lying, and I'm not. This is one of Nobuo Uematsu's earliest games he ever worked on the composition for, and compared to his later work, this sucks hard. It's repetitive as it uses the same 5 or 6 notes for an entire 10-second section of a song. Making matters worse is that it's annoying as heck, and the same track is used for 90% of the game. This in turn makes me want to turn it off sooner rather than later. The gameplay is awful. This is one of the most difficult, cryptic, and broken role-playing games I have ever played in my life. Like I said before, it's a vertical scrolling shooter with RPG elements. There are various elements you got to avoid like barricades, enemy shots, pits, and so forth. You can destroy elements of the level to reveal different things like upgrades, healing items, and so on. So to some extent, it plays like the Adventures of Dino Riki, except in the Adventures of Dino Riki, the platforming was mandatory. Here's the only thing I liked about the game, and that's its concept. A 2D shooter with RPG elements was a pretty original idea at the time, and you don't see it that often. After that is where this game goes off a cliff. The first problem is the controls are mediocre at best. Because of the upgrade system, you start off running so slow that I could outrun the guy that you're playing as while I'm having an asthma attack. At this point, anyone who has ever played Gradius with no power-ups knows what happens next. You're going to take a lot of cheap hits and deaths. Even worse is when you die or complete a level, the game resets you back to square one, and you have to earn everything back again. Even worse isn't the fact the game becomes a blur at points. The healing pickups don't give you that much compared to how much damage you take on a regular basis, or even the fact that the bosses are the most anticlimactic fights I've ever played, is that this game is the most cryptic I've ever played. If you don't have a walkthrough, then you will never finished this game ever. This is because it gives you no information at all. Every RPG ever released gives you as many details as possible related to gameplay at the time. King's Knight only tells you the character's level at the end of each stage with an unexplained number of stars. Guess what? I'm going to explain the stars to you. Those stars are pieces of the spell needed for the end of the game. Again, this is not explained, and if you don't pick up all 4 pieces of the spell, which one of them is hidden in a dungeon that you have to, destroy certain elements in the game with each character, you can't finish it. To top it all off, if you die with one character, the game pointlessly has you move on to the next. I say pointlessly because if you die with one character, like I said before, you can't beat the last level of the game. I see no point in doing this because if you die ever, you might as well reset the game. This only serves as padding to an already short enough game. So at the end of the day, we got a game that's 5 levels long, has tons and tons of padding, and the company who worked on it went on to become a legend in this industry. Yet somehow Square-Enix released this to the Virtual Console. Man, I know if I created this game, I would have distanced myself so far away from it that I would be considered on another planet. Overall, King's Knight is an awful game. The fact that almost nobody remembers this is self-explanatory. This was one of those games that almost put Square out of business, and it shows. The graphics are okay at best, the music is trash, and the gameplay is just flat out poorly done. If you want to play something that Square worked on before Final Fantasy, then go play Rad Racer or 3D World Hunter. As for those looking for a good 2D shooter meets JRPG, then go check out Sigma Star Saga for the Game Boy Advance. It's an example of what could come from this genre and a pretty underrated game. On the other hand, King's Knight is a game where you should leave it at the bargain bin or on the shelves of people who collect NES games or every single Square-Enix game ever released. I give it a 2.5 out of 10.